Thank you, counsel.
Your Honor, as the Harrington brothers come forward towards the podium, it's really my honor and pleasure to introduce them to the court. One of the themes I think the court has obviously heard from the victims is how many years these murders and sexual assaults have haunted them. These two brothers, Ron and Bruce Harrington, I met many years ago when they asked myself as a state legislator, Assemblyman Lou Correa and Assemblyman Jackie Spear, a state senator, and Jim Brulte, a state senator, to be the statewide co-chairmen of the Proposition 69, the DNA Initiative. As a result of trying to find out who killed their brother and sister-in-law and ended their amazing life short, these two individuals and their family invested their blood, sweat, and tears and their money to change the course of California history when the voters passed Proposition 69. And we all know the effect of what DNA has done, not only genealogical, which of course was critical in the solution of this case, but of course, good old-fashioned DNA. It is really my honor in front of the honorable court to introduce who these gentlemen you met before when we were at Sac State for the plea. But it really needed to be emphasized what these two men have done to pursue their brother and sister-in-law killer. And at this time, I'm honored to introduce to you, Your Honor, Ron and Bruce Harrington.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. And when you're ready to proceed, I'll hear what you have to say.
Your Honor, have you thought about the many lives that have been affected? Have you thought about how many lives were changed because of that? Remember, some of the rape victims were just 13 and 15 years old. The Golden State Killer truly is the worst of the worst. 13 murders, 50 rapes. He is the most prolific murder rapist ever. His crimes were so brutal, so heinous, so sadistic. He is just a violent sexual predator. Pure evil. 7 weeks ago, on June 29th, I was before Your Honor. I was in the courtroom when all the pleas were taken. I listened to all those guilty pleas. I listened to all those admissions of all of those rape cases and related crimes. He appeared meek and feeble. It was just a facade. I listened as the prosecutors described virtually identical offenses over and over again, like a broken record. I just want your money. I just want your money. As the afternoon wore on, I was getting physically sick. I just kept thinking, there can't be any more crimes. They continued all afternoon. At the end of the day, there were 161 separate crimes. The Golden State Killer is and always will be the poster child for the death penalty. He has taught us how important the death penalty is. We need the death penalty because of people like him. The reason we have a death penalty is because of people like him. In 2016, the voters of California voted not only to uphold the death penalty, but they voted to accelerate the appeals process in a death penalty case. In March of last year, Governor Newsom placed a moratorium on the death penalty. He ignored the law. He failed to follow the law. And he interjected his own personal opinion that in a modern society, we must be lenient and compassionate. Governor Newsom, please explain to all of the murder victims' families how they should be lenient and compassionate. Governor Newsom, please explain to all of the rape victims, all of those courageous women, how they should be lenient and compassionate. Governor Newsom, you are wrong. My older brother and I are very supportive of the death penalty. The death penalty does act as a deterrent. We still need the death penalty in California. There were significant practical considerations that we faced in this case. 40 years have passed. Some of the rape victims have died. Some of the rape victims were disabled and couldn't even make it to court. Witnesses have died. Certain witnesses needed to lay the foundation to get certain items of evidence into trial, have died. The preliminary hearing alone had 100 witnesses. The preliminary hearing was going to take 4 months. And that's before we get to the trial. The trial was going to last a year and a half. We were dealing with Governor Newsom's moratorium. We needed 10 to 15 more years that we don't have. In a death penalty case, there's an automatic appeal to the California Supreme Court, and that takes 10 years. We had COVID-19. How do we keep the victims safe? How do we keep the witnesses safe? Life without the possibility of parole was the correct decision in this case at this time. 4 brothers. Oldest brother, Bruce. I'm Ron, number 2. Number 3 brother, Doug. Youngest brother, Keith. The youngest of all the brothers, the smartest of all the brothers. He was finishing medical school early. He wanted to be an emergency room doctor. His wife, a pediatric nurse. They wanted to help people. They'd been married 3 months. August 19th, 1980, the Golden State Killer walked into their home, tied them up, raped Patty, bludgeoned them both to death, and then pulverized Patty. Our dad found them 2 days later. Dad was never the same. Back at that time, Dad would put on Thanksgiving dinner for over 35 people. How do you do that without your youngest son and his wife? Dad spent the last 15 years of his life trying to solve this case. So much effort, so much time devoted to this. So many private investigators. So much money was expended. The initial reward was $25,000. My dad increased that to 6 figures. Dad passed in 1995, never even knowing the DNA connection. In late 1997, we received a call from Larry Poole, the Orange County Sheriff's Office, linking by DNA Keith and Patty's case to another murder in Irvine. By late 2000, 10 murders had been linked by DNA. By March of 2001, the 50 rapes in Northern California had been linked by DNA. The last offense was in 1986. Where had he been? Why had he stopped? The working theory at that time was that he was in the prison system doing 15 to 20 years on another rape charge. Easy solution. All we need to do is get DNA from all the prisoners and we can solve this case. At that time, California lagged far behind other states in terms of DNA collection. We knew that if we were ever going to solve this case, it was going to be through DNA. we needed to have a larger DNA database. When we started, it was a $100 fine for a convicted felon in prison to refuse to give a DNA sample. They all refused. There were countless trips by the remaining brothers here to Sacramento before the Public Safety Committee. We were just trying to change the laws in efforts to increase the DNA database. Older brother Bruce testified before the Public Safety Committee. Keep in mind, these are just private citizens trying to make our laws better in the interest of public safety. First issue, the use of reasonable force to obtain DNA samples from the prisoners that refused to give it. Sounds easy. There was a buzzsaw of opposition. And as an example, there was the infamous confrontation between older brother Bruce and Senator Burton. Here is a portion of that YouTube link. For people to
For people to oppose this politically, for whatever their personal agendas are, is an abomination. It's very frustrating, and there are no answers, but I'm certainly on a quest to put the questions to the right people on an uncomfortable basis if necessary.
They were 24 years old. He was a fourth-year honors.
Bruce Harrington was there to tell his brother and sister-in-law's story.
They were gagged and they were trussed, and Patty was methodically tortured and raped multiple times, all the while my brother laid there watching what was happening. The perpetrator then coldly beat them over the head, tucked the covers in, turned the light off, tidied the room up, and left.
Harrington singled out Senator John Burton for some pointed criticism. Burton had been quoted earlier in news reports as saying inmates might be injured or even killed by forced DNA sampling, and that he thought the legal standard for reasonable force was too broad.
And all I see and hear from Senator Burton, his staff, and his cronies is a buzzsaw of opposition and obfuscation, focused more on the rights of prisoners than the rights of victims and their families. And frankly, I'm outraged and I'm insulted. For those this morning who fail in their responsibilities to protect the public, I say publicly, shame on you.
You know, first of all, I have two of my best friends murdered. My mother was attacked and almost raped at the age of 76 at knife point, and I resent the fact that you're telling me I love criminals. All right, I resent that. You do what you want, sir, about what we do. Our responsibility is to do what we think's right. If we can fix this bill in a manner that makes sense, I'm happy to support it. All right? Don't you tell me that all of a sudden I'm some kind of criminal lover. Like I've never felt the same type of pain that you have over what criminals have done to people.
Yeah. The proof, Mr. Burton, will be in the vote on this bill.
The Public Safety Committee tabled the vote that day. But there is a bigger issue. It was not just obtaining DNA samples from prisoners, but obtaining DNA from all convicted felons and DNA at the felony arrest level. As you could tell, it became clear that the legislature was not interested in dramatically increasing the DNA database. Nothing was going to be accomplished in Sacramento. If the legislature is not going to change or make new law that dramatically increases the DNA database, what do you do as a private citizen? The only option is to put an initiative on the ballot and have the public vote on it. The initiative process. What a monumental task. Do you have any concept of what goes in just to even qualify an initiative for the ballot? Doug and I helped as much as we could. When our dad passed, the torch went to the oldest brother. That's just how it worked in our family. You saw him in that video that we just played. You saw how ticked off he got with Senator Burton. Well, he got ticked off again, which ultimately led to Proposition 69. The DNA initiative became a reality. Bruce co-wrote it, Prop 69, and sponsored it. Our current Orange County District Attorney, Todd Spitzer, was the statewide co-chairman for Prop 69, which passed in November of 2004. Up to that time, there had been 1,247 DNA hits in California. Now with Proposition 69, there were increased collection of DNA samples. Prop 69 was self-funded. There was no taxpayer expense. He did a great job at writing it. Over time, there was a significant increase in the DNA database. It helped solve so many old crimes. It also exonerated the innocent. As time passed, even more DNA was in the system. Nobody on this case ever gave up. Investigators worked this case their entire career. Some retired. Some even came out of retirement to continue working on this case. 2007, number 3 brother Doug passed. We lost Doug. Time went on, but this case was not solved. In 2016, it was only the 2 older brothers that were left. It had taken an emotional toll. All of these efforts to solve this case, but it still remained unsolved. You know, you just have to deal with it. You compartmentalize it, you park it away. You have to live your life to the fullest. You have to move forward. 3.5 years ago, we were contacted by Todd Lindsay and Joke Venusian. They were filming a documentary entitled Unmasking a Killer. They wanted to interview Bruce and I. That was not an easy decision. Emotionally, you just can't open this wound again. Every time you relive it, especially in public, it takes a toll. But at that time, this case still needed exposure. We still needed the public's help. Here is the most prolific murder rapist in history. But most people had never heard of him. Earons. Earons. The East Area Rapist in Northern California, the original Night Stalker in Southern California. Not to be confused with the Night Stalker, who was Ramirez in Los Angeles. Nobody had ever heard of this guy. At about this time, McNamara wrote her book, giving him the moniker, the Golden State Killer. It stuck. Some of the documentary was filmed in 2017. The documentary aired 5 Sundays in a row in March and early April of 2018. And the Golden State Killer was arrested April 23rd, 2018. Some of the documentary was filmed after the arrest. Remember, as of 2004, when the DNA initiative passed, there had been 1,247 DNA hits. As of July 2020, last month, there have been more than 81,000 DNA hits in California. Thank you, Brother Bruce. DNA is just the 21st century fingerprint. Let's follow the criminal progression of the Golden State Killer. He started off as a peeping Tom, a voyeur, somebody lurking around women's bedrooms at night, peering in. He then became a 2-bit burglar, breaking into women's bedrooms, stealing trinkets and women's underwear. Then he progressed to more serious burglaries. Then he would break in and rape women alone. Then he progressed to what I call husband and wife rape. He would go into a couple, the husband would be tied up and the husband would be forced to watch as his wife was raped. But he wouldn't kill him. He then progressed to murder, where the moment he walked into that house, he knew he was going to kill him. If these crimes had occurred today, DNA may have stopped the Golden State Killer before he progressed to murder. IgG. IgG. Investigational genetic genealogy. It is this new investigational tool that was used for the first time in a criminal case to arrest none other than the Golden State Killer. It involves law enforcement use of public access DNA sites. It is the use of DNA to build family trees to narrow down potential suspects. It is the next advancement of DNA as an investigatory tool. It is so important for law enforcement to be allowed to solve these cold cases using public access DNA sites. When you go to these public access DNA sites, you can either opt in or opt out. If you opt in, law enforcement is allowed to do their job. We encourage everyone to opt in. The Golden State Killer case never would have been solved without law enforcement use of these public access DNA sites. Remember this new investigatory tool, IgG, that was first used with the Golden State Killer? That same investigatory technique, that same tool, as of last week, has solved 93 cold case murders and rapes across the country. It is not just California, it is almost every state in this country. It is probably the most important advancement by law enforcement in solving cold case murders and rapes. Bruce and I would like to thank law enforcement for a job well done. So many of you to thank. So much effort was put in. All the investigators, the forensic investigations, the DNA specialists, the genetic genealogists. So many of you never gave up. We also want to thank all the district attorneys that have been involved, but especially what I call the big three: Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer, Sacramento District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert, and Ventura County District Attorney Greg Totten. These three are on the forefront. They are using this cutting-edge technology. They are developing protocols and best practices. IGG is where it's at. Please opt in. Let me introduce the last video. It starts off when older brother Bruce receives the telephone call from our dad, who had just found Keith and Patty dead.
Reliving what it was like when I get a phone call at 6 o'clock when we're having dinner, and our kids back then were 6 and 8, and Keith and Patty are dead. What are you talking about?
And you called me.
And then I called Ron, and then he called Doug.
Bruce is telling me Keith and Patty are dead. It didn't compute. It didn't compute. It just, you don't even know where you are. And we then went down to my dad's house, which is where Keith and Patty were living. Keep in mind, this is a guard-gated community. And that whole evening into the early morning hours the next morning.
Sitting on the curb.
Huh.
In the cold. We had to sit out there, not knowing what's going on, and having the house released back to us 3 and 4 days later, having to go back into the house and tidying up and dealing with fingerprint dust everywhere.
We were so frustrated as a family because we didn't know anything, really, other than Patty was raped, they were tied up, and they were bludgeoned to death. And Patty was much more brutalized than Keith. The 3 remaining brothers taking the mattress to the dump. That, you just never get over that. There's just certain snippets that will always be embedded in your mind that
That's true.
You don't get over. The worst part of this case really were the first 17 years. It never made any sense. The horrendous amount of money that my dad spent trying to solve this case. The private investigators. It was so frustrating not knowing. You cannot let it go. And that was the worst part really about this. Finally, after 17 years, when there was the DNA connection that was made, all of a sudden, you have some semblance of the why, and that's how this whole DNA issue became so important, and really the family's efforts to try to solve the case through DNA. The Golden State Killer took out my baby brother and his wife. My dad spent untold sums of money trying to solve this case. The amount of money that my older brother had to commit to this effort was unconscionable. To get an initiative just to qualify for the ballot, over $1 million. And that's before you actually get into the election process. The amount of effort he had put in for years, and then fortunately Proposition 69 then passes.
The euphoria of the passage of Prop 69 in 2004 was tremendous. Our expectation was we could finally solve the case. And as the months and years went on, the expectation was that this was a repeat offender and that eventually his DNA would show up in the system. And it didn't. It was pure disappointment. We certainly never thought the case would be solved, and I believe the vast majority of the other victims had the same framework, because there's only so long until you reach a point where you got to move on. You got to move it somewhere in that little cubbyhole of the memory quilt that you have, and deal with it sometimes, but not let it dominate your everyday. I've been going on a roller coaster for 40 years. This out of the blue solution happens, boom, just like that. And all of it, everything you tried to do, putting it behind you, kind of put it in perspective, not interrupting your day, your life, all that goes away and it's right back there, and you're dealing with it.
I actually went to Keith and Patty's grave. They're in the same grave together. I took a couple roses and just said, we finally got him. It was a tough day. Keith was the smartest of all of us.
It was.
He graduated from UCI, undergrad, cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. Literally was 3 months away. He was going to graduate in December of 1980 from medical school. Patty was a pediatric nurse. He wanted to be an emergency room doctor. He wanted to help people. And he was not only the smartest of all the other brothers, he was also the best athlete. And to really think of what a difference he would have made in this world. How many lives he would have saved as an emergency room doctor. And you reflect back on just, what a waste. And that's part of what makes this so difficult and so challenging. Keith was that special. He was the most special of all of us. And he was the youngest, and he died first. And that's just so wrong on so many levels. That's why you never give up. You do not get over this.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, gentlemen. Anything else from council before we adjourn?